The cemetery was quiet except for the soft rustling of leaves in the cold autumn wind. A young boy, no older than 10, sat cross-legged on the damp grass in front of a simple gravestone. His small hands rested on his knees, and his head hung low. Beside him, a scruffy little dog with matted fur lay curled up, its tail occasionally wagging as if trying to comfort the boy. The gravestone read, "In loving memory of Clara Thompson, beloved mother." The boy, named Ethan, had been coming to the cemetery every day since his mother's passing 3 months ago. His father had left them years ago, and now, with his mother gone, Ethan was all alone. The little dog, whom he called Buddy, had shown up one day and never left his side. Buddy was his only friend in the world. Meanwhile, a sleek black car pulled up near the cemetery gates. Out stepped a tall, well-dressed man in his late 40s. His name was Alexander Grant, a billionaire known for his ruthless business deals and cold demeanor. He had come to visit his own mother's grave, something he rarely did. As he walked through the rows of gravestones, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel, he noticed the boy and the dog. Something about the scene made Alexander pause. The boy's shoulders shook slightly as if he were crying, and the dog nuzzled closer to him. Alexander felt a strange tug at his heart, something he hadn't felt in years. He hesitated for a moment, then walked over. "Hey," Alexander said softly, his voice breaking the silence. "Are you okay?" Ethan looked up, his eyes red and swollen from crying. He quickly wiped his tears with the back of his hand and shook his head. "I'm fine," he mumbled, though it was clear he wasn't. Alexander crouched down to Ethan's level, his expensive coat brushing the ground. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ethan," the boy replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Alexander," the man said. He glanced at the gravestone and then back at Ethan. "Is this your mother?" Ethan nodded, his lower lip trembling. She was all I had." Alexander's chest tightened. He had never been good with emotions, but something about Ethan's pain struck a chord deep within him. He reached out and gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice sincere. "I lost my mother too, a long time ago." Ethan looked up at him, his eyes wide with surprise. "You did?" Alexander nodded. "It's hard, isn't it?" Ethan didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said everything. Alexander sighed and stood up. "Come on," he said, extending a hand to Ethan. "Let's get you out of here for a bit. You and your dog." Ethan hesitated, glancing at Buddy, who wagged his tail as if agreeing. Finally, he took Alexander's hand and stood up. The three of them, the billionaire, the boy, and the little dog, walked out of the cemetery together, unaware that this chance encounter would change their lives forever. Alexander led Ethan and Buddy to a small, cozy diner just a few blocks away from the cemetery. The diner was warm and inviting, with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filling the air. Ethan clung to Alexander's side, his small hand still holding onto the billionaire's larger one, while Buddy trotted happily beside them, his tail wagging at the new adventure. The diner's bell jingled as they entered, and a few patrons glanced up from their meals. Alexander ignored the curious stares and guided Ethan to a booth by the window. He slid into the seat across from the boy, while Buddy settled under the table, content to rest his head on Ethan's feet. A waitress approached, her smile warm and genuine. "What can I get for you folks?" she asked, her eyes lingering on Ethan's tear-streaked face. Alexander glanced at Ethan. "What do you like to eat?" he asked gently. Ethan hesitated, his eyes scanning the menu. I don't know," he mumbled. "Mom used to make pancakes for me on Sundays." Alexander's heart ached at the boy's words. He turned to the waitress. "We'll have a stack of pancakes, scrambled eggs, bacon, and a glass of orange juice for him," he said. "And a black coffee for me." The waitress nodded and hurried off to place the order. Ethan sat quietly, his hands fidgeting in his lap. Alexander studied him for a moment, noticing the worn-out clothes and the faint bruises on his arms. He wondered what kind of life the boy had been living since his mother's death. "Ethan," Alexander began, his voice soft but firm. "Where have you been staying since your mom passed away?" Ethan's eyes dropped to the table. "I've been staying at our old apartment," he admitted. "But the landlord said I have to leave soon. He said I can't stay there alone." Alexander's jaw tightened. He had seen enough of the world to know what happened to kids like Ethan, kids who fell through the cracks of the system. He couldn't let that happen to this boy. "Do you have any other family?" Alexander asked, though he already suspected the answer. Ethan shook his head. "It was just me and Mom," he whispered. "And Buddy." Alexander glanced down at the little dog, who was now snoring softly under the table. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had never been one to get involved in other people's problems, but something about Ethan's situation felt different. It felt personal. The waitress returned with their food, placing the plate of pancakes in front of Ethan. The boy's eyes lit up for the first time since Alexander had met him. He picked up his fork and began to eat, his movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring every bite. Alexander watched him, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose, a reason to do something beyond his usual routine of board meetings and business deals. "Ethan," Alexander said after a moment, "how would you like to come stay with me for a little while, just until we figure things out?" Ethan froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked up at Alexander, his eyes wide with surprise and uncertainty. "Stay with you?" he repeated. Alexander nodded. "I have a big house, and there's plenty of room for you and Buddy. You'll be safe there." Ethan glanced down at Buddy, who had woken up and was now staring at him with hopeful eyes. The boy's lower lip trembled, and he nodded slowly. "Okay," he whispered. Alexander smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Good," he said. "We'll take it one day at a time." As they finished their meal, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that this decision would change both of their lives in ways he couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was doing the right thing. After leaving the diner, Alexander drove Ethan and Buddy to his sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city. The mansion was a grand, modern structure surrounded by lush gardens and tall trees. As they pulled up the long driveway, Ethan's eyes widened in awe. He had never seen anything like it. "Is this your house?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with wonder. Alexander nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yes, it is, and for now it's your home, too." Buddy barked excitedly, his nose pressed against the car window as he took in the new surroundings. When the car came to a stop, Alexander helped Ethan and Buddy out, leading them up the marble steps to the front door. The inside of the mansion was just as impressive as the outside. High ceilings, sparkling chandeliers, and elegant furniture filled the space. Ethan hesitated at the doorway, his worn-out sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. He felt out of place, like he didn't belong in such a grand setting. Alexander noticed the boy's unease and knelt down to his level. "Hey," he said gently. "I know this is a lot to take in, but you're safe here, okay? This is your home now, for as long as you need it." Ethan nodded, though he still looked unsure. Buddy, on the other hand, seemed right at home. He trotted around the foyer, sniffing everything with curiosity. Alexander led Ethan to a spacious guest room on the second floor. The room was cozy yet luxurious, with a large bed, a desk, and a window that overlooked the gardens. "This will be your room," Alexander said. "If you need anything, just let me know." Ethan stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. He had never had a room like this before. It felt like something out of a dream. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. Alexander smiled and patted the boy's shoulder. "Get settled in. I'll have someone bring up some clothes and anything else you might need." As Alexander left the room, Ethan sat down on the edge of the bed, his mind racing. He couldn't believe how much his life had changed in just a few hours. Buddy jumped up onto the bed and curled up beside him, his warm presence a comforting reminder that he wasn't alone. Over the next few days, Ethan and Alexander began to settle into a routine. Alexander, who was used to spending most of his time at work, found himself coming home earlier than usual to spend time with Ethan. They would eat dinner together, talk about their days, and even play with Buddy in the garden. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace in the living room, Alexander noticed Ethan staring at a photo on the mantel. It was a picture of Alexander as a young boy, standing next to his mother. "Is that your mom?" Ethan asked, his voice soft. Alexander nodded, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Yes, that's her. She passed away when I was about your age." Ethan looked up at him, his eyes filled with empathy. "Do you miss her?" Alexander sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Every day," he admitted. "But over time, it gets a little easier. You learn to carry the memories with you, like a part of your heart." Ethan nodded, his gaze returning to the photo. "I miss my mom, too," he said quietly. "Sometimes it feels like she's still here, but then I remember she's gone, and it hurts all over again." Alexander's heart ached for the boy. He knew that pain all too well. "It's okay to feel that way," he said. "Grief is a part of love. It means you cared deeply for her." Ethan looked up at him, his eyes glistening with tears. "Do you think she's watching over me?" Alexander smiled softly. "I do. And I think she'd be proud of you for being so brave." For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt a sense of comfort. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for now he felt safe and cared for. And that was enough. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan began to open up more to Alexander. He talked about his mother, their life together, and the struggles they had faced after his father left. Alexander listened intently, his heart breaking for the boy who had endured so much at such a young age. One afternoon, while they were sitting in the garden, Ethan asked Alexander a question that had been on his mind for a while. "Why did you help me?" he asked, his voice tentative. "You didn't have to." Alexander was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I saw a part of myself in you," he finally said. "When I was a boy, I felt lost and alone after my mother died. I wished someone had been there to help me. When I saw you at the cemetery, I knew I couldn't walk away." Ethan nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "Do you think, we're kind of like family now?" Alexander smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest. "I think we are," he said. "Family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who care for you and stand by you, no matter what." Ethan's face lit up at the words, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of belonging. Buddy, who had been lounging in the grass nearby, barked happily as if agreeing with Alexander's sentiment. As the bond between Ethan and Alexander grew stronger, Alexander began to make significant changes in his life. For years, his world had revolved around business deals, board meetings, and the relentless pursuit of success. But now he found himself prioritizing something far more important: Ethan. One morning, Alexander surprised Ethan by announcing that he had taken the day off work. "I thought we could spend the day together," he said, smiling as he handed Ethan a small backpack. "We're going on an adventure." Ethan's eyes lit up with excitement. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. "You'll see," Alexander replied with a playful wink. They drove out of the city, the bustling streets giving way to open countryside. Ethan pressed his face against the car window, marveling at the rolling hills and fields of wildflowers. Buddy sat between them, his tail wagging furiously as if he too was excited for the day ahead. Their destination was a serene lakeside park, a place Alexander had visited as a child with his own mother. The park was quiet, with only the sound of birds chirping and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Alexander spread out a blanket on the grass, and they sat down to enjoy a picnic lunch he had prepared. As they ate, Alexander shared stories from his childhood, happy memories of his mother, but also the struggles he faced after losing her. "I didn't have anyone to guide me," he admitted. "I made a lot of mistakes along the way. But I don't want that for you, Ethan. I want you to have the support and love you deserve." Ethan listened intently, his heart swelling with gratitude. "You've already done so much for me," he said. "I don't know how to thank you." Alexander shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. Seeing you happy is all the thanks I need." After lunch, they took a walk along the lake, Buddy running ahead and chasing butterflies. Ethan laughed as the little dog darted back and forth, his energy seemingly endless. It was a sound Alexander had come to cherish, a reminder of the joy Ethan had brought into his life. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Alexander turned to Ethan with a serious expression. "Ethan, I've been thinking," he said. "I want to make things official. I want to adopt you if that's something you'd like." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment he was speechless. You want to adopt me?" he finally asked, his voice trembling. Alexander nodded, his eyes filled with sincerity. "Yes. I want you to be my son, in every way that matters. You don't have to decide right now, but I want you to know that the offer is there." Tears filled Ethan's eyes as he threw his arms around Alexander in a tight hug. "Yes," he whispered, "I want that too." Alexander hugged him back, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a true purpose, a family to love and protect. The adoption process took several months, but finally, the day came when Ethan officially became Alexander's son. The courtroom was filled with a sense of warmth and joy as the judge finalized the adoption. Ethan sat beside Alexander, dressed in a crisp new suit, his heart pounding with excitement. Buddy, who had been allowed to attend as a special guest, sat quietly at their feet, his tail wagging softly. When the judge declared the adoption official, the room erupted in applause. Ethan beamed, his eyes shining with happiness. Alexander placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his own eyes misty with emotion. "Welcome to the family, son," he said, his voice thick with pride. To celebrate, Alexander threw a small gathering at the mansion. Close friends, staff, and a few of Ethan's new classmates from school were invited. The garden was decorated with fairy lights and colorful banners, and a table was piled high with food and desserts. Ethan couldn't stop smiling as he introduced Buddy to his new friends, who were all eager to play with the little dog. As the evening wore on, Alexander stood up to make a toast. "Today is a special day," he began, his voice carrying over the quiet hum of the crowd. "It's not just about me becoming a father or Ethan becoming my son. It's about the power of love, resilience, and second chances. Ethan, you've taught me so much about what truly matters in life. I'm proud to call you my son, and I promise to always be there for you no matter what." The guests raised their glasses, their cheers filling the air. Ethan felt a lump in his throat as he looked around at the people who had become his family. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly loved and accepted. Later that night, as the party wound down, Ethan and Alexander sat on the porch, watching the stars. Buddy lay curled up at their feet, his soft snores blending with the gentle rustle of the wind. "Do you think Mom would be happy for me?" Ethan asked quietly, his gaze fixed on the night sky. Alexander smiled, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I know she would," he said. "She'd be proud of the brave, kind, and amazing person you've become." Ethan leaned against Alexander, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." Alexander wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close. "No, Ethan," he said. "Thank you. You've brought so much light into my life." The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, both Ethan and Alexander felt a sense of hope. They had found each other in the most unexpected way, and together they were ready to face whatever came next.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.